Am I good to go?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Damola Ulade. I'd like to thank Esselina Macomb for the opening remarks and our funders, FSD Africa, Gates Foundation. I will be talking about the findings from a diagnostic study which was conducted late last year and earlier this year, focused on cross-border remittances between South Africa and Zimbabwe, Malawi, and Mozambique. Cross-border remittances is a significant source of income outside of those that are economically active or those that are absorbed by the formal economy. And there's quite a substantial level of migration within the region, particularly to South Africa, which is the economic hub. Specifically within this presentation, I will be highlighting the cross-border remittances ecosystem factors that would be driving access, usage, and to a certain level, the quality of the services, and to understand the disparities between men and women, or the gender dynamics that come out of these analysis. We would also be looking at second, third order implications of those engaged in the remittances from the perspective of the senders, to the perspective of the recipients, to look at individual level aspects that might have gender implications, household level aspects that have gender implications, and at a societal level as well. And the presentation would also be dealing with some of the existing policy and regulatory initiatives that aim to drive and catalyze the remittances market itself, and to the extent that it would have an impact on the adults in the region, and obviously these initiatives being positive, resulting in positive outcome for both men and women. So from a content perspective, there will be an introduction. I'll provide a perspective on the remittances market itself, and then some of the policy, regulatory landscape, the gendered experiences of migration and remitting, some of the actual research findings, and then some recommendations and conclusions. So we are here, as I've mentioned, to assess the role that remittances, migrant remittances make, so cross-border remittances specifically, and the fact that this is a critical source of income in the region makes it something salient for discussion, both from a policy perspective and a regulatory perspective, given the fact that money is being moved across borders, and there are risk issues that needs to be considered from an exchange control perspective or financial surveillance perspective. So essentially, the purpose of the study and the objectives is to look at how one can develop gender intentional programs and seek to improve financial capabilities and inclusion for women in the corridors that are outlined on the screen. So what does the cross-border remittances market look like? First, we need to get a sense of the level of feminization of migration. Obviously, this is from the sender perspective. So we are looking at migrants from the three countries that have come to South Africa. And over time, we're seeing an expansion in the number of women migrants coming to SA, considering the fact that there's been an expansion in work or job opportunities, specifically in the services sector. So in restaurants or childcare, for instance, or even in farms. So this is a slight shift away from the previous driver of migration into South Africa, which would be looking at men coming to work in the mines many years ago. But with the evolution of the South African economy, we're seeing more of the services sector lending itself to migrant labor from the rest of the region. And if we look at the chart on the screen, we can see that the women that are driving migration into South Africa, mostly within the ages of 15 to 40, which expresses the fact that these are mostly economic migrants. And we can also see from the line charts there that it somewhat tapers off once you look at those that are slightly more older. So essentially, this is what we're trying to say here. Migration is increasingly becoming feminized, and it's also a function of the fact that women are taking more initiatives in terms of seeking out employment and taking the responsibility of providing income to their beneficiaries back home through remittances. So from a migration perspective, we can then look at the way in which the formal remittances market is absorbing or accounting for gendered or female transfers, female-driven transfers from a volumes perspective. I believe this is looking at volumes. So as you can see there, we are essentially looking at the three top corridors actually between South Africa and the rest of the region, and I believe these three corridors make up about 70% or so of total remittances from South Africa outbound. If you add Lesotho to this, which is not included, we'll be looking at about 80% of the remittances market. But however, we can see that Zimbabwe, obviously, the totals is the highest there, and we can also see that the Mozambican percentage of female transfers started increasing, particularly from about 2019, as you can see the incline there. Malawi, the female participation of Malawi or usage of formal remittances is slightly benign, but it's also an upward trend, and it's somewhat similar for Zimbabwe. The reason for these increases, benign or not, is the fact that there's been quite a bit of innovation from a regulatory perspective in the region in terms of the introduction of non-bank licenses. There's been some drive to utilize the risk-based approach in terms of the Financial Intelligence Center Amendment of 2017, and quite a bit of competition, healthy competition, that has led to an increase in the level at which women and men are using formal platforms. This slide tries to support the fact that we're looking at low-income users, both men and women. So if you look at the table on the right, which looks at the average transaction size, across the three countries, you can see that the average transaction size is actually decreasing over time, which is indicative of the fact that poorer people, low-income people, people working piecemeal jobs are starting to use formal financial systems for cross-border remittances. I mean, looking at Mozambique specifically, 17,000 in 2016 and reducing to 1,137 for the total, and looking at 3,000 for women and going down to 1,000. And the similar trend can be seen across the three countries. So essentially, we can see that average transaction sizes are dropping, which is indicative of financial inclusion. The table on the right just goes to show that the authorized dealers that are mostly banks, relative to authorized dealers with limited authority that are non-banks, their role in formal remittances is starting to diminish, given the fact that there's been a rollout of the non-bank licenses, and there's less visibility of commercial banks in this space. Okay. Remittances market and competition. This slide, again, following from the previous slide, essentially looks to explain how some of the innovations and the policy interventions have led to more competition, and to what extent that has calibrated to drive towards reaching the UN SDG goals 10.C. which essentially looks to drive or get rid of remittances corridors that are over 5%, I believe, and to some extent corridors that are under 3. And within the SADC region and the corridors we're looking at specifically, we're still quite a bit off that 3%. However, we've seen quite a lot of gains over the last 10 years, and we expect that with more initiatives, particularly the availability of digital first mile services for people to send money outside of South Africa, compared to the fact that the remittances market is mostly cash-based at the moment, that could also move the needle in bringing down the cost. So digital mobile technologies, an expansion in agent networks, and remittances services that are accustomed for the needs of our users could definitely bring down the prices. Policy environment. So I think I've already mentioned the fact that the risk-based approach was introduced in 2017, and the fact that we've looked at the encouraging of non-banks through regulatory changes to get more non-banks participating in the region, to diversify cross-border payments services ecosystem. That has been something that has been quite important. And then within the region itself, we've seen similar activities in Zimbabwe, in Malawi, and in Mozambique. We've also seen commercial partnerships between some of the adlers and mobile money operators is facilitating digital receiving of money on the recipient end, for instance. And of recent, we've seen the introduction of a middle mile scheme called the Transaction Cleared on Immediate Basis, the TCIB, which has been implemented by Banks of Africa, for instance. And all these things we are imagining would also help to catalyze and improve the drive towards a higher access to formal remittances, both for men and women. From a gender-specific policy perspective, across the 4 countries, there are financial inclusion-related policy across the board, which has specific gender components in terms of its outcome indicators, and some of them are on your screen. Obviously, these are important in terms of ensuring that the policymakers and the stakeholders are empowered and have levers to track the extent to which women empowerment is being driven and enabled through the development of remittances markets. So this is essentially what this slide is trying to speak to. So the next section then looks at the gendered experiences of migration and remitting. The overview of the gender dynamics, essentially some stylized ideas in terms of what we found here is that there are some disparities in terms of the education and financial autonomy between men and women in terms of literacy levels. So you would find that there are higher literacy levels for women, especially in Zimbabwe, for instance, over men, but not so much in Malawi and Mozambique, where men are slightly more literate. And then from a remittances accessibility itself, for you to be able to use a remittances, formal remittances services, you ought to have access to either a store of value service from a bank, or you've been onboarded by a money transfer operator. And across the board, we typically find that men are much more financially included, which is also a disparity that could have a gender dynamic within the context of this conversation today. And then for anybody, especially from a sender perspective, to be in a position to send any money, you need to have money. So you need to be absorbed by the labor market. You need to have some kind of a job. And typically, we also find that Mozambican and Malawian women into Africa are more likely to be unable to cover their living costs, given some of the constraints that they might have in terms of some of their income earning prospects compared to male counterparts. Sorry. And then we also find that women tend to be better remitters. Specifically, women tend to sacrifice some of their aspirations to ensure that the money that they earn is sent to people back home, particularly to support childcare and ensure that the kids have access to go to school, and to ensure that there's access to healthcare, and obviously the monthly expenses around food and communication and things of that nature, which could be important for human capital development. So women are much more better remitters, as that's something that we've picked up in the research here. Some of the other gendered dynamics of migration is that there's an emotional cost to migration. Women obviously are seen to be caregivers. They're meant to be taking care of people at home. So that there might be an aversion to women leaving the household, and at some level, even at an individual level, the woman herself might have some kind of an emotional cost or incur some emotional cost around migrating. And then generally speaking, when it comes to remittances specifically, we do see that the regulations are somewhat gender neutral. And this might not necessarily be a good or bad thing, in the sense that what one needs to focus on would be the downstream effects of some of these regulations and policy. And as we've seen so far, there hasn't been any overt downside to some of the regulatory interventions within the context of, say, KYC and AML applications, which would negatively affect women relative to men, for instance. I think I'll just keep it moving. Maybe then just going to the research findings specifically. From a sample perspective, we looked at those 3 corridors, and we had a total sample of 180. Some of them were face-to-face, some of them were telephonic, and the final sample design is on your screen there, as you can see. We have 90 senders and 90 recipients in total. The migration dynamics, as I've mentioned, there's quite a bit of an economic hardship in the region. People want to move to South Africa to earn a living. From a gender role perspective, women's migration is mostly tied to family dynamics. They tend to run the gauntlet, or seem to be seeking approval for traveling and to migrate, compared to men. For instance, men can just make a unilateral decision to travel, and then the women might then follow suit. But this dynamic is slightly changing, because you might find that there are households that are headed by women, and it's not always a dynamic where there's a man and a woman within the household. But generally speaking, it's much more easier for men to take up and leave to seek out income earning opportunities, to be in a position to send money back home. The remittances behavior, women are more likely to send remittances to their parents, and the use case for that is mostly for childcare, as I've mentioned. The primary beneficiaries of the remittances, particularly from women senders or female senders, is for children, suggesting that the support is ultimately aimed at the children's well-being. There's a preference as well for women to send money to women. From the findings that we got in this specific survey, it's not necessarily representative of the universe of women in the region, but from our sample, that is what that looks like. And then within the context of the outbound remittances market in South Africa, we have an ADLA 4 license that actually allows for goods remittances over and above people sending cash. And from the sample itself, people tend to prefer sending cash as opposed to using the ADLA 4 license, which allows for sending of goods, which could be groceries, which could be things like household equipment like fridges and things of that nature, furniture. So people tend to prefer cash. So now looking at values and frequencies, female senders tend to send lower values home. The pattern is mostly monthly, and in Malawi specifically, even though the women in South Africa tend to be earning less than men, they tend to sacrifice and send larger sums back home. As we've said earlier, women tend to be better remitters of money, and this is kind of representing that assertion. And some of the values are on the screen there for you to see, which is pretty much within or between 500 to about 2,000 rands, which is just about $100 on a monthly basis from a monthly remittances perspective. The channels that are being used, they're mostly non-bank service providers that are driving remittances. We do see that the senders at some level are using bank transfers, which is slightly curious because you would find that the migrants in South Africa, of which 80%, especially the SADC migrants, 80% of them are undocumented. And if you're an undocumented migrant, it means you don't have the immigration status to use a bank account. So we might have surveyed or recruited for respondents that are actually not necessarily on the lower end of the income spectrum at some level. But however, if you just look at the first four bars, which speaks to money transfers through non-banks, those are much more dominant over banks. So again, speaking to the fact that the Adlers are driving the channel usage in terms of cross-border remittances. What are remittances used for? Food security is a key issue or key concern for senders. Food and groceries, as I've mentioned, education, and to some level, some senders are much more hands-on in trying to direct how the funds are used, even back home. From a recipient perspective, we can also see that some of the recipients, some of them might tend to be dependent fully on remittances income, so they try to get into micro-entrepreneurial activities. So at some level, remittances income is also supporting SME or micro enterprise activities at the receiving end, which is quite important in terms of empowering people, especially women. This slide here is a bit repetitive. However, it's really speaking to the regulation around the financial integrity considerations of using formal financial services, particularly remittances, and the need for users not to be anonymous and the need for them to have some kind of a proof of identification. And if we look at both the senders and recipients, we can see that across the board, there's quite a high incidence of ownership of passports, specifically for those that are traveling. And on the recipient end, you can see that they have a personal ID, although there are some disparities between the total number of men versus women. In Zimbabwe, for instance, the turquoise versus the navy blue, you can see that actually women have more personal identification number there. So it's slightly different. Actually, it's men. What am I reading here? It's women. Essentially, there is a delta. It's not 100% across the board, basically speaking. So some of these aspects, some of these disparities might then lead to the inability to use formal remittances, which might then make people go use informal platforms. Other aspects from a policy and regulation perspective would be the access to recourse mechanisms when there's been issues with the users and the service providers, particularly recipients from Malawi, that were less confident in the understanding of how to seek out recourse mechanisms, for instance. There's quite a bit of crime perception in terms of moving money around. I've already spoken to the gender bias in terms of women up and leaving their homes to travel, to become economic migrants. And they are also differing perceptions in terms of the legal environment and the legal framework that makes respondents confident in terms of the legal protection within the context of having any kind of issues with service providers, for instance. So these are also aspects that also are obviously gendered that we've picked up from the findings. What is quite important for us to pick up here is that across the board for both senders, what the slide looks specifically at senders, there's quite a high level of mobile phone usage, particularly for Malawi, smartphones, even in Zimbabwe, less so in Mozambique, although the males dominate smartphone usage in Mozambique. And then from a financial inclusion perspective, in terms of what people have financial access to, it is mostly mobile money, although again, we can see that there's quite a bit of bank account ownership, which means that we've somewhat recruited people that might not necessarily be within the bottom of the pyramid strata in terms of a financial inclusion issue. So it's a mix of people that might be well off and people that are also at the low income end. Essentially, mobile money is really driving financial inclusion in the region, which is quite important for sending and receiving remittances. Just to kind of get to a point where I'm wrapping up this presentation this morning, some of the themes that we've picked up in the research, particularly from the primary research component of this work, is the reliability and responsibility issue around the fact that women tend to be more reliable and more responsible remitters than men, which I've tried to use some statistics to support. There is an impact on senders' finance in terms of the burden and the constraints that happens when one needs to split or forego their own personal well-being to then send money back home to take care of people. And usually women tend to take on that burden more than men. And then there's also the issue of agency migration, and I believe with the expansion of the different means in which people can earn income and I suppose the less draconian means in which household dynamics manifests itself in terms of the role of women, we'll be seeing more empowerment for women to also become economic migrants if, for instance, the labor market in their respective countries stifles or is not able to absorb them, which can then lead to a regional labor market of which the SADC regional integration policy actually aims to drive, and agency migration is critical to that. There is a preference for formal channels based on the sample that we've looked at, although we do know that there's still quite a bit of use of informal channels, but from the sample itself, we do see the use of formal channels. And when we look at the remittances networks and perception of discrimination, there seems to be evidence of women-to-women networks, for instance. We don't know what potential impact that could have at a macro level, but there's credence in pointing out that the bilateral sending and receiving, which could either be men to women, or women to men, or women to women, or men to men, could have some kind of an impact in the way in which remittances is being used, and is also one of the themes that have come out of this piece of work. So to conclude, really, from a remittances market ecosystem perspective, foreign exchange control reform in terms of spurring competition, enhancing service quality, and lowering costs continues to be a critical issue. The risk-based KYC implementation also continues to be something that one needs to continue to drive. Also, it's important, as I've mentioned, the TCIB system as a middle mile infrastructure could also limit or lower pricing, which means that the value that is being transacted is not going to be depleted by the cost of sending money. The licensed tiered approach, Adlers, non-banks, and diversifying the payments ecosystem will be important. The importance of digital payments environment in terms of slightly moving away from a purely cash-driven, agent networks-driven remittances ecosystem will be quite important. Within that context, it would also be important to point out that having more female agents, for instance, could also maybe encourage the use of formal remittances, for instance. But nonetheless, digital payments will be important both from the sender perspective and the recipient perspective. Again, the AML issues needs to be sorted out. The vulnerabilities of female migrants, which is something I'm hoping one of the panelists can also address in terms of the diaspora policy that Lesotho specifically is looking to implement, and the need specifically for gender disaggregated data. The continued need for gender disaggregated data will be quite important for us to track some of the stylized facts and themes that we've picked up within the context of this piece of work. And with those words, I've come to the conclusion of the presentation. I hope I am within time. Thank you. I suppose the next session in the agenda would then be to transition to the panel discussion. I would then welcome Kenilwe Tsotso, who is the FinMark gender financial inclusion expert, to come on board and introduce our panelists and get that going. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Damola. As Damola had basically said, is that cross-border remittances, obviously, they must be vital for women's economic empowerment. And he really truly highlighted this when it comes to that migration has become very feminized. And due to this change in remittances behavior that we shared in the presentation, it's important that we ensure that women have access to safe, efficient, and affordable means to send and receive money across borders, which is crucial for the financial independence and well-being of their families. So our panelists today will be sharing insights on the different projects and policies they have participated in to strengthen basically cross-border remittances in their countries. So firstly, I would like to introduce you to Ndabenhle Mangwe from Eswatini, who is the Rural Finance Coordinator at Financial Inclusion and Cluster Development, known to most people as FINCLUDE. FINCLUDE aims to improve prosperity and resilience of Swazi smallholders and micro entrepreneurs through increasing profitable and resilient links to markets and appropriate financial services. Its development objective is to increase returns from sustainable farm and non-farm enterprises for rural people, including poor and youth, through efficient public and private sector investment. So today with Ndabenhle, we will be debunking the cluster development project and its impact on remittances service. Next on our panel, we have Florence Mohashwa from Lesotho, who is actually the Financial Institutions Manager and Coordinator for the Financial Inclusion Policy and Programming at the Ministry of Finance. She has coordinated the implementation of financial sector policies and strategies, which includes the National Strategic Development Plan, Financial Sector Development Strategy, and the Financial Education Strategy in Lesotho. Today, she will be speaking on the National Diaspora Policy in Lesotho, which focuses on an inclusive policy development designed to ensure optimal engagement of stakeholders in Lesotho. And last but not least, our third panelist is Sophie Mills, who is based in Kenya and is the FSDA Network Gender Lead. Sophie leads the FSD Network's collaboration gender program, which works with FSDs to mainstream gender into their operations and support the capacity to deliver systematic gender impacts. Sophie will be basically sharing global insights on remittances trends and how we can leverage on those case studies to improve cross-border remittances in the SADC region for women. So firstly, I'd like to then hand over to Ndabenhle. Ndabenhle, please tell us more about the cluster development project. How did you design it? And basically, how does it intersect with cross-border remittances?
Thank you so much, Kene, and greetings to all the panelists and greetings to all the members on the call. As mentioned in your introduction, the FinClude project is financial inclusion and cluster development. In its sense, we are assisting people from the rural areas, mainly women and youth as our primary focus, to form what we call clusters. A cluster in its simplest term will be a small group of farmers with a common objective. It may be in form of production in terms of agriculture, maybe they are producing a similar product, which we then are to train as a project to help link to the market, to help link to finance, and also to help provide trainings in terms of agribusiness training and also financial literacy. Now, how is this linked to remittances? Obviously, as these rural people are to transact or interact with the market and also to interact with different individuals within their production space, they will need platforms in which they will remit. For in the case of Eswatini, we do have financial banks, and also we do have mobile platforms which are linked to our network MTN. We have seen quite dominantly the usage of the mobile networks for these rural people. That's the area where they usually remit due to quite obvious facts. They are remote in their geographic locations. So you find that this MTN Momo is accessible to those remote areas. And also it will need just a cell phone gadget, be it connected to the internet or not, but that particular individual can afford a small gadget to remit using that. So that's the situation that we are working on. And we have seen quite good improvement in terms of access to finance through remitting on this platform of Momo.
That's good to hear. But you know, there's always that challenges that come up, especially when you are developing such projects. So I just want to get some insight from you. What were the key challenges that specifically women faced in accessing and utilizing, let me say, the Momo app?
Thank you. I think the first one would be access to the gadget itself. I think in a research by FinMark in 2019, we have seen quite a drastic improvement in terms of our beneficiaries getting or maybe having access to the mobile cell phones themselves for them to be able to transact on this Momo. For international remittances, we have seen our beneficiaries using commercial banks where they are assisted by either their siblings who would have access to a bank account. Now, mainly because our beneficiaries are situated in rural areas, you find that they do not have access to a bank account, but they may rely on their siblings for that provision. Other challenges that we have seen within that space, mainly for women, is the challenge of the KYC, the Know Your Client requirement. One would be, in particular, the proof of residential address. So the project has worked tirelessly with the chiefdoms to assist or maybe also to help the women to obtain those proof of residential address through a letter that may be written by either the chiefdom to be provided to the bank. And also we've seen banks coming to the party through a provision or maybe utilization of affidavits, which they may be used by our women to provide as proof of residence. But then the broader issue is that our commercial banks are situated mainly in the urban areas, and our beneficiaries are in the outskirts of town. However, we have seen a few commercial institutions like FNB and Standard Bank introducing what we call cash plus agencies, which would be more like an agent for the bank situated in rural areas. That those initiatives are starting to pick up nicely, and we are seeing our beneficiaries warming up to that. However, there will be the need for a bank account to be opened, as it were. This is the area where the project and through the Center for Financial Inclusion, we are hard on the ground to market the need for our beneficiaries to consider this.
Thanks for that. And I think I just have a follow-up question with that. Now that, let's say, FNB has created these agents, how have you been able to basically train these women to actually be able to access this app or to access these services?
Okay, thank you. What we usually do, we have what we call multi-cluster stakeholder meetings, where we will invite all stakeholders that are involved in the project, be it input providers, it can be financial institutions, it can be microfinance organizations. So all the stakeholders that are involved directly or indirectly with the project, we will invite them in what you call an MCM, a multi-stakeholder, a cluster meeting, where we invite our beneficiaries to interact directly with those stakeholders. However, it is worth mentioning that in terms of the utilization of the banks as form of remittance for international transaction, the pickup is quite slow. We are to be more on the ground to conduct more outreach exercises and partnership with the banks to make sure that our beneficiaries become familiar with this product. On the other side, in line with the mobile money network, we have been engaging MTN to consider within their platform platform for international remittances. The mobile network provider is still piloting that, and also still in contact with our regulator to see if it can be rolled out. It's still on pilot stages. We are in good engagement with the MTN to follow up that process. I think in due course we will give positive results from that end. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And if there are any questions for our panelists, please feel free to add it in the chat box, and we'll definitely get back in our Q&A session. So right now, I would like to then move on to Florence. And Florence, I'm really interested if you could elaborate on how your proposed diaspora policy specifically aims to empower women through the utilization of remittances, and basically the development purposes outside of household consumptions.
Florence is on mute. Florence, we can't hear you.
Oh, my apologies. I forgot to
you.
unmute myself. Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you, Kinelu, and good morning to all the participants and the panelists. In Lesotho, we really acknowledge the importance and the contribution that remittances bring to the economy. And to that extent, we have a diaspora policy that we have developed that is engaged to, in fact, that is meant to address some of the important issues that can contribute to the economy through investment by the diaspora into the economy. So when we come to the utilization of remittances for the senders and also the receivers, the strategy focuses more on trying to create a policy dialogue and also access to information to the diaspora on the possible investment opportunities in the country. That is done in collaboration with the Lesotho National Development Corporation that is mandated to bring investment to the country, as well as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And what is happening is, okay, some outreach programs are being done in South Africa, where the majority of the migrants are. And as that happens, there are clusters of the migrants that have been categorized, the 4 clusters. And we have the textile workers, of which the majority are women. We also have the domestic workers, and also that is comprised mostly of women. And then we have the mine workers and the farm workers. So as these outreach programs are done, each segment is attended to individually, such that information that relates to what investment opportunities they can take advantage of as migrants are brought to them. Information is shared, and also at the same time they are also in fact empowered on what avenues or what channels they can be able to use to save and also to remit money home that are within the formal financial sector, such that whatever that is being sent home, and that would catalyze their participation in the investment opportunities there is done within the formal financial sector. So a number of outreach programs, investment forums is being held. If I can just be specific, last year around August, September, an investment forum was hosted in Johannesburg, Sandton, such that, okay, at least they are aware of what the government has for them, as diaspora, that they can be able to contribute to the national economy, other than just, okay, utilizing the remittance money towards a consumption of, smoothing household consumption. So that is in a nutshell what is the government doing in that regard.
No, that's really wonderful. That's really wonderful with what the initiative that the government has taken. And I think now I would like to dive deeper actually in the policy itself and what it has meant for both senders and recipients that are actively involved and actually benefit from this economical development initiative.
Okay, in order to facilitate, efficient engagement with the diaspora, we use the Basotho Diaspora Association, because that way, in terms of better coordination, they are better coordinated, because even like with the different clusters, they would know, okay, in a particular place, like for instance, we know in the KZN, we find mostly the textile workers, of which the majority are women. And given that, okay, they would be the members of the association, so it's easier to engage with them, and also even to mobilize them, like in the instance where we're having a financial service providers, being invited to partake in those outreach programs, just to showcase, okay, what products are available that can, the migrants can be able to utilize to remit home, and what other instruments they can even offer on the platform. Like for instance, we know in terms of, mostly, or the migrants, they will not be having like, okay, legal rights to work, in as much as they will be working in South Africa, but they will not be having legal rights to work. But nevertheless, they still need to remit money home. And, when they go through like other financial service providers like the banks, it's not so easy for them to even open an account and also to remit. But through the mobile money platforms, they are able to send money, and also they're able to at least save a certain portion of whatever that they have worked for in the mobile money platform. And also even the outreach programs, they are also used to, see, or even, okay, devise ways in which they can be, skills transferred in trainings, and also, showcases some of the opportunities, be it in financial instruments or any other, like, okay, we have that just completed what we call the SDG investor mapping, where, that exercise outlined what are the investment opportunities in which sectors are there in the country. So those outreach platforms, in fact, they are programs that are being used also as platform to share what, the SDG mapping, has uncovered, in which areas they can be able to invest. So as they are also encouraged to send money home, using formal conduits, they're also encouraged to save, such that they can be able to to participate in what has been uncovered by the SDG mapping and in which areas of investment they can be able to invest, their hard-earned money.
No, it's so interesting, just pulling from what Ndabenhle was talking about when it comes to KYCs and referring it obviously to a kingdom. And we know in Lesotho, they call it the Kingdom of Basotho. I'm seeing that there is a trend that KYC is kind of a limitation there. Would you agree with me?
Yes, I would agree with you, because I've indicated, some of them would be in South Africa without the necessary documentation. And that in itself, it acts as a barrier to them interacting with financial service providers, and always have to rely, on third parties to do that on their behalf. And that becomes costly. And also that even drives them further out of, the remittance market to even ascertain, saying, okay, this is how much is being remitted in a specific time. That will be excluding, the majority of, the remittance senders, because of, them not having the necessary documentation to facilitate for their interaction with the financial service providers.
Definitely, thank you. And I know in the Ministry of Finance, it is a project that you're maybe working on in terms of good ID and how we can actually make it easier for people to remit, and particularly, if I can say, women. So just to touch up on another question, I think you've touched on some of it, but I just want to dive deeper into it. Could you elaborate on any partnerships or collaborations that are integral to the implementation and success of your proposed diaspora policy for women's economic empowerment?
Yes, we have numerous organizations that are involved in the implementation of such. A number of government agencies. It's the Ministry of Finance, of course, and also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Relations, by virtue of its mandate, because the micro and the diaspora, I would say they're under their portfolio. The central bank being, the regulator, and also the supervisor of financial services, and also we have the other UN agencies. The International Office for Migration. We also have the UNDP, and we also have the LNDC, the National Development Corporation, in terms of investment, being the investment driver or for all national investment. Also, we have a number of financial service providers. Those who are in the insurance space, and also the mobile network operators. We are also thinking about, because with interaction and discussions in our forums, also involving the banking sector as well, and whoever that is in the financial sector space, that we feel that the migrant can leverage on the services and products that they offer, that will be able to catalyze the vision that we want to achieve, of ensuring that they are part and parcel of the investment participants, as that is essential in the national economy. So yes, we foresee a number of participants coming forth in terms of us collaborating as we implement these policy, and also the remittance strategy, because we have a specific a strategy that talks to remittance, that is sort of supporting the diaspora strategy, and also the vision that we want to achieve as far as investment, and also the involvement and the participation of women is in the investment of the country.
Thanks, Florence. I mean, it's great to see what Lesotho is doing. And this is a question that I actually posed also to Dabenhle, which is, what do you think really is the key challenges that you have found in this particular policy when it relates to women?
We feel that they are still marginalized in terms of, I would say, identity, because identity is the first step for them to be able to interact with the financial service providers, such that they can become active participants in the remittance market. So we are well aware of that. And we are also collaborating with our Ministry of Home Affairs, who are the owners of the identity, to see what are the possible strategies and solutions that we can bring forth that would address such bottlenecks. So besides that, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, like I said, in the conduct over the outreach, the programs, they are also trying to share as much information as possible, and also trying to understand what are some of the challenges that the women faces, other than access to finance. There are so many that are social related, harassment, a lot of challenges. So they are trying to, in the outreach program, they just leverage on that to try to understand what are the other challenges beyond identity that are they are faced with, that we can come up with solutions so that their stay outside the country is comfortable, and they can be able to participate in the remittance market meaningfully, not just for their household well-being, but also their contribution into the economy. Yes.
Thank you for that, Florence. And just a last question from my side, which especially when it comes to the gender sphere, we do have the knowledge, we do have the terms that we speak about, but most of the time there is always a lag when it comes to how do we actually measure where we are in terms of the progress of any kind of project. So my last question to you is, what measures does your policy proposal include to ensure that women, particularly those in underserved or marginalized communities, is efficiently tracked?
We have realized over the years, even as we implement our financial sector strategies, that we are really lacking in terms of in as much as we may have some targeted interventions to women, but in terms of measuring progress and also having the specific indicators as we measure that, we are lacking in that respect, so that at least we can be able to measure as to the extent of the success of the interventions that we implemented that were targeted to women. So we are really trying to improve on our monitoring and evaluation frameworks, such that we can have specific indicators that would have disaggregated data on women. That we will be able to know that our interventions that were targeted, at least we can know that we have managed to achieve, and we can see change as we track progress in their implementation. So that is what we are looking into so that we can have disaggregated data that would differentiate between men and women in the interventions that we implement.
Thank you so much for that, Florence. So I'd like to move over then to my next panelist, who is Sophie. And just a quick question on my side for you, Sophie, is what are some successful case studies or best practices of initiatives promoting gender equality and women's empowerment through cross-border remittances? And also what innovative approaches or technologies are emerging to address the unique needs and preferences of women in this context?
Thanks, Kinira. Yeah, that's the $1 million question. I'm glad you saved that one for me. I think we probably need to break that one down a little bit. I was doing some reading in preparation for the panel discussion and looking at some of the work that the UNCDF's Migrant Money Unit have been doing on these kind of innovative solutions. And I think one of them, because I'm cheekily checking the questions that are coming up in the chat box as well, and I know there was one sort of talking about sort of add-on products. So I'll maybe answer that question at the same time. I think if we're looking at innovations from the supply side, there are a couple of interesting developments. One side of it, I think, is around just product tweaks, the ways in which we design products for women and men. We know that women have different needs. We know that they engage in different ways with financial services, and remittances aren't necessarily going to be any different to that. So I think, anything that can be done to speed up transaction times, to lower costs, to make it easier for women to be onboarded onto these platforms, the kind of stuff that Florence was just talking about, is already a great step. And I think that's what we've seen in this market. If we look at the research that FinMark has done, not just this diagnostic that was presented today, but more widely, what we've seen is the sort of unintended benefits of gender neutral regulation in the region has been to bring a lot more women on, because costs have gone down and KYC requirements have gone down. So that's a really positive thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about was outreach to women, kind of meeting women where they are. Florence sort of alluded to this when she was talking about the segmentation that you see, women remitters tending to work on textile, tending to work in domestic labor. Being able to find those potential remitters, to find those potential clients, I think, and meeting them where they are and understanding what their needs are is a really important way. And there are a couple of interesting examples of that. There's Centbee, a Korean fintech that does international money transfers. They do a lot of, they have a sort of a big client segment, which is women who are in Korea, South Korea, as domestic workers and who are remitting back to their home countries. And they realized that first of all, they went to find them where they were. You advertise where these groups meet, you use those networks, and you onboard through those networks. But they also provide financial planning, financial literacy as part of their offering. So, again, this is something that Damola alluded to, and one of the recommendations that came out from this very small scoping that we did, which is around the fact that people who are remitting, regardless of whether they're men or women, have very limited budgets and need to be able to, to have support with their financial planning. So I thought that was an interesting one. I think there's also a big piece around remittance-linked financial products, and how do we leverage? And again, both of my fellow panelists have spoken about how do we leverage these financial flows? How do we leverage the fact that people are using remittances to support them to use other financial services that might be beneficial to them? A couple of examples that touch on how diaspora can be mobilized. So there's a remitter called Simplify, which operates in the UK and I think is now operating in the EU, and used by diaspora who are in the UK, in the EU, who are remitting back to sub-Saharan Africa. And they've created a deposit-backed loan. So a remitter puts deposits into an account, and this acts as a guarantee for a loan which the remittance, the habitual remittance receiver can then take up. So it's building on an existing relationship, existing flows of money, but adding on to it to provide a credit service. And similarly, and sort of reflecting the question that was asked in the chat as well, Ping, P-I-N-G, which again is a UK-based financial service provider, offer the opportunity for diaspora from Ghana living in the UK to pay bills for family or friends in Ghana. So, whether that would be insurance or healthcare or utilities, so I think these are quite interesting ways of looking at how do you build on an existing client base? How do you offer additional services that could be interesting and that could have value? And I just make the point, that thinking about the specific kinds of services that women remitters value, so school fees or groceries or whatever it may be, looking at how you can build on or create new services that leverage that interest. Now I'll stop there.
Thanks for that, Sophie. I think I just want to pick a couple of my panelists' brains here. And it's, for me, always the $1 million kind of question is, Davenhle, if, for instance, you had all the, if I can say, money on the world to make sure that this remittances cluster project actually really kicks off, what would be the first thing that you would do, or what is the plan at the end if you had all this funding, particularly tailoring it to women?
Thank you, Kinelwe, for the question. Well, I so wish I would have all the money in the world. But then to respond to the question, I think that the ultimate goal for the project is for all women and youth in particular to have easy access to any platform where they can remit. What we can do, we have to first mobilize in terms of policy development. We need government to ensure environment that will be workable for all institutions to assist our beneficiaries to be able to remit in any form of platform or location where they are centered. And then secondly, to mobilize the private sector, mainly financial institutions, to provide maybe requirements that are fair and that are able to cover for everyone within the population. For rural people and for women in particular, there are quite a lot of limitations, and mainly because you are married to Mr. Mangwe shouldn't limit you from getting a KYC document. So she has to go an extra mile to get an affidavit, go to the police officer to get a stamp, mainly because she is married to someone. So by virtue of you being an Eliswati, you should have access to this because you are part of the population and you have equal rights as compared to men. I feel our women are discriminated still, and we need policies that can advocate for that to change. I would want to change it from that angle because from the top end, it will then filter down nicely as compared to moving down from the bottom going up. There are quite a lot of challenges. We have seen our chiefdoms supporting our women, but then it's limited because if a financial institution won't recognize a particular document that is not typed or stamped, it provides more limitations. So if I had all the money in the world, I would ask for our government to support and also government from other states to also support us to formulate a harmonized maybe policy which speaks to the support of women in terms of how they can remit. We have seen our economy in Eswatini develop through agriculture, which is the prime focus of our project. And for that to happen, we need more women to participate. Our project has about 60% women participating, and compared to men, there are still more women who are active within that space. And we rely on women to produce the food for us in the country. Similarly, on what you call off-farm enterprises, that would be other enterprises where women are engaged. We see them transacting more. And also that's where we see more women exporting certain goods into South Africa or Mozambique and also bringing in more goods into the country just to make a living. So we would want those policies to facilitate and make those processes easy for our women. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And also, I mean, it goes back to some of the points I think, Sophie, also you raised in terms of simplify and ping. I think maybe it's easier because, you know, wherever there's capital, you are able to reach those marginalized communities. So that's why I'm saying, like, in the ideal world, this is something that would actually work for everybody. Remittances, cross-border remittances is what is needed because at this point, our financial so-called solid banks do have a lot of red tapes for people. And we need to just make sure that we really solidify this whole transactions in terms of cross-border remittances. And I think, let me jump on to Florence. And I think I'll also ask the same question from you. It's easier to work with solutions, like I said, when there is money there. So if you had all the money in the world, how would you improve on your strategy when it comes to the national diaspora, but linked with cross-border remittances?
Thank you, Kinelwe. I think, you know, the focus will be more on empowering the women in terms of financial education And also in terms of skills development, they can be able to become active participants in the economy. We know that they are in South Africa just because I'll focus on South Africa because that is where the majority are. They are in South Africa because they were treated there due to lack of, in fact, job opportunities this side. And in my view, job opportunities are created through putting in some investments in some sectors where there's a potential for growth, and that would need people to have the necessary skills for them to become active participants in such that we can guarantee production. So the focus will be more on skills development and also on financial education and investment education, such that they are able to become active participants, and then their productive capability is enhanced because they will have necessary skills to be able to ascertain that. And also, the other chunk would be directed towards policy dialogue and access to information, because that is very important. In as much as they may become participants in the productive economy, but if there is lack of access to information, especially markets that the products can be directed to in terms of the trade information, all efforts become useless. So those are the three areas that I would direct the money to: skills empowerment, access to information, and also empowerment in the investment and financial education. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, this will really open up the doors, I think, with cross-border remittances very well. But I think also I will just hand over this question to Sophie. And my question to you is, how can then data collection and analysis be improved to better understand the impact of cross-border remittances on women's economic empowerment and financial inclusion?
I feel like that's very much a FinMark Trust question rather than a Sophie Mills question. So I hope that our colleagues are busy typing into the chat box, and I'm sure they can also jump in. Well, I think having it would be a really great start. It's obviously from the sort of the top-down perspective. Regulators requiring the sex disaggregation of this kind of data is sort of the sort of foundational stone for this. I would hope as well that on the supply side, the financial institutions understand the value in sex disaggregated data and understand why it is important to have these to have this data available to them. I mentioned the ways in which men and women are different in how they approach a product, how they use a product, the type of product that they want. At the moment, the remittance product is similar for everybody, but I think what we would all like to see is a way in which we can build on that, leverage these flows, either with financial or non-financial services sort of bundled around them, so that as the two other panelists have said, we can really strengthen resilience in the receiving households, but also improve the situation for the remitters, because there's one thing that this diagnostic showed us is that people are living in intense fragility and intense vulnerability in order to be able to remit back to their households, and they suffer emotional vulnerability as well, as anyone who has been separated from their children knows. So yeah, and then I think there's probably also data on the demand side that I would find interesting, because whenever we talk about empowerment, that obviously we're talking about people's ability to make decisions, men and women's ability to make decisions and to exercise agency. And again, what we saw coming out of this diagnostic, and it was sort of very indicative and just sort of giving us an idea of where we might focus attention in the future. We do see that, and again, it varies from country to country, and I don't want to make sweeping generalizations about all women, but generally we can see that women are more vulnerable find it more difficult to make decisions, are more likely to make that migration journey if they are encouraged to, or in some cases compelled to, by other household members. We see that women who are remittance receivers don't have as much autonomy over those remittances as perhaps we would like them to have. So yeah, I think definitely a piece around understanding what agency looks like in the context of that decision making would be really, really interesting. But I say that knowing that that would require a great deal of money.
Definitely. And I think there was something that I was reading up on FSD Africa, where they have a data playbook that was developed, I think, since 2014. And to get to the point where now we are able to use this toolkit, I think it's so important. And one of the things that you can put there is cross-border remittances. And the toolkit just develops in such a way that you're able to identify, have a gender strategy, how you're going to implement it. And I think this is a good start for FinMark Trust to actually know what is going on in the SADC region, because most of the time we talk about financial inclusion, but now that we're breaking it down into cross-border remittances, I find that is good. So I don't know if you have any last words, Ndabenhle, Florence, and Sophie.
Well, maybe I'll go first then. Just to say that, and I wrote this in an answer to one of the participants who'd sort of referred to the fact that this was not I referred to the fact this wasn't a statistically significant analysis. This and the other piece of research which FinMark did with the network support on women cross-border traders and the ways in which their financial flows can be improved as well. I see these as two sort of complementary early stage diagnostics that are starting to open up a conversation around the importance of distinguishing between financial flows for men and women. So it's really just getting this conversation started. FinMark Trust has been doing a great deal of work with regulators in the SADC region. My fellow panelists are doing really impressive work on these topics as well. What we're trying to do here is to make sure that conversation widens to include an understanding that men and women will experience this in different ways, and just to make sure that thread gets carried through all our discussions. And by all of us, I mean sort of everyone on this call who I assume has an interest in this subject, otherwise they wouldn't be here. How do we go about integrating gender into the work that we're all doing in the day-to-day? And how do we keep this conversation going, basically? Thanks.
Thanks, Sophie. Over to you, Florence.
Thank you, Kinelu. I think, from the government perspective and also the partners, I think we need to work more on trying to enhance our legal frameworks that would, facilitate for the active participation of women in the, leveraging on remittance to strengthen their participation in the cross-border trade. Because I realized here, Lesotho, many women are involved in the cross-border trade, and mostly would be reliant on the remittance from across the border to get engaged into that. And so, strengthening the legal frameworks that would, see them actively participating, but in the digital space of the cross-border trade. And also, working also hard and putting effort in trying to advocate for the development of appropriate products that women value beyond funeral insurance, because mostly we find that I don't know, maybe it's because it's the cash cow, the funeral insurance. If they can be able to convince the sector to provide more value-based women products that would see them being active in the investment space, and also in entrepreneurship initiatives that would be of importance. That way we'll be able to say at least we have achieved our goal of liberation on the remittances, to see women empowered in the different aspects, other than in at the livelihood level. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. And over to you, Tabitha.
Thank you. I think the panelists have touched on a few points. I'll just jump to my last two that I had. I think from where we are, I think for the support of women, I'll also include the youth as well, because we have youth who are women as well. There's just a need for us to support more on the MFIs, the microfinance institutions. We have seen them in Eswatini to be more flexible towards supporting women in terms of access to finance and credit. And they provide quite easy terms in terms of platforms where the women can remit. So we would want to see more support within that area. And we are grateful for the work that the FinMark Trust has done in terms of research in Eswatini, in terms of providing support, and would ask maybe for more of capacity building and support that we may need to expose some of our women groups. We have quite a lot of farmer groups in Eswatini and quite a lot of savings and credit groups, which are regarded as informal, but there's quite a lot of cash moving within that space. We have tried to support them through a digital record book through another app that we have worked with Well Vision. So we have seen quite a lot of money transacting within that space. So we feel there's more innovation that we need to invest within those savings and credit groups, and also assist them to link them to financial institutions to create that transaction history, which will lead to maybe credit history eventually over time. So there's a need for capacity building within Eswatini, and would ask for the trust to support. It might not be financially, but those trainings that we may give to our women, and also those learnings that the trust has had with interacting with other countries. Some of the panelists are on board here. Those visits whereby we are able to equip also our teams as well as they interact with the beneficiaries. I think that's what can help for us in Eswatini. But the Ministry of Finance in the country is working hard to support and to ease those processes internally. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And I believe we wouldn't have gotten those insights and see where actually even where we can touch again in Eswatini. So thank you for those. I think that's one's for Ndavula. But what I just wanted to say, so in closing, basically our discussion is that firstly, I just want to thank all our panelists here. You have been so wonderful in sharing all your insights. And I just wanted to say, like, I've seen that throughout our discussions, we've highlighted key factors such as accessibility to financial services, the affordability. We've highlighted the importance of financial literacy, regulatory support, technological innovations, gender-sensitive approaches, and the significance of collaborative efforts, and these factors underscore the complex landscape of cross-border remittances and the need for multifaceted solutions, And I think also as a moderator, and I think the speakers and participants will agree, is that we've recognized that there are many challenges that women face in accessing and leveraging remittances, but we've also identified numerous opportunities for progress, especially when you think about, if I have all the money in the world, what would I do? Then there are numerous opportunities there. So by fostering an environment of collaboration, innovation, and inclusive policymaking, I believe that we can create a tangible pathways for women to fully participate in and benefit from cross-border remittances. I urge that let us carry forward the insights gained from this webinar and translate them into actionable initiatives that prioritize women's financial inclusion, that will uplift their livelihoods and contribute to the socioeconomic advancement of the SADC region as a whole. Thank you all for your valuable contributions, and let's continue this journey towards it. I'll hand over to Damala.
Thanks, Kenewe. All right, thanks Kenewe, Sophie, Florence, and Bentley for the riveting inputs and discussion points. I think Kenewe has done an excellent job in summarizing everything that we've discussed, and I don't want to steal the thunder of our gender expert. However, in closing remarks, I would just say that we're dealing with remittances, and there are migrants in South Africa. We know that these migrants are mostly working in the informal sector. So I believe there is a need to support the graduation of migrants that might be in the informal economy to move into the formal economy through potentially the support of an initiative such as the diaspora policy that is happening in Lesotho to ensure that migrants are able to achieve the correct immigration status that might then improve their income earning capabilities, which obviously would have downstream implications for the amount that they can send back home. I think it's also important to point to the work that the Center for Financial Inclusion in Eswatini is doing around creating or developing a clustered value chain programming that is looking to identify net remittances recipients that are mostly women, in order to look at the manner in which that income could be leveraged and utilized to improve their income earning capability through micro-entrepreneurial activities, for instance, and to also look at how to support the expansion of savings that they're able to amass from the remittances income and the extra enterprises that they might have on the side, and to also access loans, for instance, micro loans to drive some of the businesses they're doing. And I think I've also mentioned that the remittances rails in the region is also being used for the purpose of cross-border trade. And this is a subject of a separate piece of work, but one needs to ensure that we're able to separate the amounts that are actually for social protection from a personal assistance perspective to those that could be used to drive private sector participation and drive SMME activities at a country level. It's a critical aspect to think about. And obviously there is the ecosystem of remittances as well around the issues speaking to AML and CFT and eligibility criteria to use some of these services, the need to expand and diversify the payment service providers that are in the space to further bring down the pricing, the need to digitize the rails fully from the first to the last mile, for instance. These are key aspects that we've also discussed and are quite important. And obviously, being in alignment with some of the global agenda and localizing the global agenda in terms of the experiences globally, in terms of how remittances senders and recipients are being considered from a programming perspective, particularly from some of the feedback we got from Sophie, I think is quite critical. And with all that said, I would like to thank everybody that has participated in the roundtable discussion with us, and the panelists and the team here in the office for ensuring that the internet is stable and the coffee is nice and keeping us awake, and we are keeping warm in this cold. And I'd like to wish you all a happy afternoon and the rest of the week. Thank you so much for joining us, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.